Want to say good afternoon to people. I'm Rabbi Jeffrey Shine. I'm the co-executive director, along with Eric Kaplan, of the Mordechai M. Kaplan Center for Jewish Peoplehood. Delighted that so many of you are joining us this afternoon. I think our numbers will grow. They typically do. And it's, I think, so very appropriate that when we're being international and focusing on world Jewish civilization, as in Yiddish in Sweden, we've also expanded our circle of participants here in North America. So I do want to take a moment and thank the 7 congregations across North America that co-sponsored this lecture along with us. I think we have at least a minion of folks from our 3 Twin Cities congregations who are joining us. Welcome to you. A number of people from Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York as well. So given a number of new people to the webinar, I just want to take a moment and go over some procedures. Indeed, first, you are being recorded, and I hope you're comfortable with that. We do that because we have 100 people who signed up for the webinar, and I'm guessing we'll end up with about 50. Other people have things happen in their schedule. We record and send it to them so they can listen and participate at their own convenience. If you're at all comfortable with your, I only know ein bissel Yiddish, little Yiddish, but punim is one of my favorite expressions. So we love to see your punim, but if you, for whatever reason, want to put on click off the video, you're more than welcome to do that. No questions asked. So as many of you know, the Mordechai M. Kaplan Center for Jewish Peoplehood is dedicated to taking the cumulative thought of Mordechai Kaplan, the primary text, and seeking out their implications and applications for 21st century Jewish life. That's something that thrills us to be involved in that process. And we are also explicitly trans-denominational. So if you have any connection to Jewish life, you are at the right place. No questions asked. But your questions, though we don't ask questions of why you come to us, we do encourage your questions. We're coming right off of Pesach, right? Where questions were so prominently part of our experience. We welcome your questions. When our webinar goes over 30 people, and now we're at 35 and likely to grow again, I'm guessing 50, we don't do our questions live. It's much more efficient if we gather them in the chat box. So when you have a question, please put it in the chat box. My colleague Eric will survey those questions when Jan is done with his primary presentation. We'll begin to share those questions with them. We've always found at our Kaplan Center webinars that people do like to hang around beyond the hour and a half. We encourage you to do that if you can. And during that last half hour, we revisit questions. Some people have questions that get formulated only as they hear other people's questions. So that'll give us a second opportunity to take in those questions. I will also put in the chat box, or maybe I'll ask my colleague Eric to do it now, even as I'm speaking, my email address, jeffrey@kaplancenter.org. If you are at all uncomfortable with the chat box function and want to send me your question directly to my email, I will be glad to take a look at that. In addition to all our new guests, I wanted to recognize and welcome our board members from the Kaplan Center. That would be Eric Kaplan, James Susswein, Mel Scalt, and I believe 2 newly elected board members, Caitlin Hayes and Rabbi Jeffrey Eisenstadt, will be joining us in a bit. I'm very eager to begin to hear from Dr. Jan Schwarz. He is the centerpiece of our talk. I do want to take just a minute to put this talk in the context of the Jewish holiday, Machzor Chagim, the flow of the Jewish calendar year. As you are all very aware, Wednesday night marks Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I think it's very important to be attuned to the Hebrew construction of that day. It is not Holocaust Day alone. It's Yom Ha-Shoah v'Havura, the day of dissipation and heroism. Now, heroism is a complex concept and comes in very different ways. I am aware, and I bet there are others on this call, of some connection between the people who frame this as a day of heroism as well as dissipation. We're very aware of the Warsaw Ghetto fighters and heroic resistance to tyranny. And I can't help but think that some of those people in Mariupol who are resisting the last thrust of the Russian army give us another contemporary example of Gvura. And I also want to underscore, and then with this, I'll turn it over to Jan, that part of Gevura, part of heroism is culture. And I was properly chastised. I welcomed it by Rabbi Robert Tabak at our first webinar of the year saying, Jeffrey, you're talking as if North American Jewry and Israel are the only two centers of Jewish life. Aren't we, then Kaplan encouraged us to be, about world Jewish civilization? Don't forget about Europe. So to paraphrase the famous quote of Mark Twain, that the announcements about my death are entirely premature, so were the announcements that European Jewish culture was dead after the Holocaust. And this is such a wonderful example of its vibrancy and coming back to us. So without further ado, I do want to introduce Dr. Jan Schwarz, who is professor of Yiddish at Lund University, the only professor of Yiddish in all of Scandinavia, an expert on the story of Yiddish in Europe, across the world, and in Sweden. And I will put the link to his bio. It's been sent out to you a couple times, but I will drop it in the box for you to see his very impressive bio. But without further ado, I'm going to ask Dr. Schwarz to come forward and begin to talk with us about this extraordinary topic. So, Jan, the screen is all yours. Jan, you'll need to unmute yourself. You were muted with everyone else, so you'll have to unmute yourself. And I would suggest bringing Jan forward into speaker view, but that's your choice. That's what I'm doing.
So what I said before while I was muted is thank you so much, Jeffrey, and thank you for the invitation. And I am very delighted to be here today to talk about this fascinating topic. And basically the program is for me to talk for approximately 40 minutes. And I have a PowerPoint presentation. And after that, I am really very much looking forward to your questions and comments. And that's always the most exciting thing for me when I get feedback and questions. So let me start. I will share my screen now and start the PowerPoint. And it is here. So, here we have two very distinguished old gentlemen, very important figures in the Jewish world of the 20th century. And I'm sure you all recognize the two people. And they actually did not inhabit two separate civilizations. They inhabited the same civilization, which was the Jewish civilization with origins in Eastern Europe, the Ashkenazi civilization, the a Yiddish-speaking civilization. And I think it's appropriate to start with them because Singer, as you well know, received the Nobel Prize in Literature in '78 and came to Stockholm. And it has been very important in the renewal or in the development of Yiddish in Sweden. Singer as an ambassador of Yiddish, and particular through translations of his work into Swedish, has been really important in spreading the word about Yiddish culture. And I just want to give you a little anecdote. A remarkable thing is that I've been in touch with the publisher of Singer's work in Swedish, who is actually a Polish Jewish family. And they managed to publish since his Nobel Prize around 1 million copies of his work in Swedish translation, approximately 25 or 30 different works. And this is really remarkable when you think about this is a population of maybe 10 million people or something like that. So I just wanted to start with that, and then we can go on. This is an important statement that really created the foundation for the establishment of Yiddish as one of 5 official minority languages in Sweden. And it happened in '99, and the Swedish parliament basically decided to recognize 5 national minorities in Sweden: the Jews, the Roma, the Sami is an indigenous population in Finland, Sweden, and Norway, and the Swedish Finns, and then the Tornedalians, which they speak a dialect of Finnish, and they are located on the borders between Sweden and Finland. And by ratifying the Council of Europe's Charter for Regional and Minority Languages, Sweden committed itself under international law to protecting the minorities and supporting their languages and cultures. And this is a very important document, but there's more to the story, and I'm gonna continue the story later on in my talk, because in the beginning, there was understandably enough and a great deal of resistance to recognize Yiddish as one of these 5 languages, because it was a very small number of people who actually spoke Yiddish at that time. It's probably in the range of 2,000 or 3,000 people in Sweden that speak Yiddish or have some kind of command of the language. And there was a whole interesting back and forth between the Yiddish speaking and the Jewish community and the authorities. And I'm going to get back to that later in my talk. But I just want to show you something here, which I think is kind of interesting. I'll see if I can... yes. So this is a good way to start. And this is the website of the police in Sweden. And as you will see now, I don't know if you are with me in the share. I'll be back here. I think you should be with me now. You can see it now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So this is just the National Police website in Sweden. And now it's in English. And if you go up under other languages, you can see some major languages, of course, English, German, French, Spanish, and so on, but also the 5 national minority languages, Yiddish and Menkele, which is the Finnish dialect, and Romani Chip. Let's go into Yiddish. So here, basically all official things that has to do with the police is being made available in Yiddish. So you can imagine there's a great deal of work for Yiddish translators from Swedish or English, because it's not only the police, it's all things that have to do with the Swedish government and with the authorities in Sweden that has to be made available in the 5 minority languages. And this is a good example of that, because Yiddish is on the books as a national minority language, there is all these things follow along with it, basically. So I thought that was interesting to see. And I am going to go back to my presentation. Well, let me tell you a little bit about how this came about with Yiddish in Sweden or in Scandinavia. So the history of Yiddish and Scandinavian begins with 2 seminal Yiddish memoirs from the 17th and 18th centuries. One I'm sure some of you know, it's by Gelikel Hamel, a wonderful memoirs that she actually wrote in Altona, which was in the northern part of Germany and was part of Denmark at the time in the 17th and early 18th century. And it was written in Yiddish, a very interesting memoir, highly recommended. And this guy, his name was Aaron Isaac. You have his years here. He was the first Jew who came to Sweden and settles in Sweden. And he also wrote his memoirs in Yiddish, which was not the Yiddish we use today, the Eastern European Yiddish, but a Western form of Yiddish. And so this is the first Jew that came to Sweden and settled in Sweden. And he wrote, and I'm sure he used Yiddish as a daily language in his community and his family. So the first wave of Jewish immigration to Scandinavian countries from Eastern Europe resulted in the establishment of small cultural centers, publishing houses, theater, and presses in cities like Copenhagen, Malmö, Stockholm, and other places actually. But these were the main cities. When the Yiddish writer that I'm sure all have heard about, Sholem Aleichem, fled to Copenhagen with his family at the outbreak of World War I, a small and very cohesive Jewish immigrant community warmly received the Yiddish cultural hero. And just a little anecdote, my grandfather, who came to Copenhagen from White Russia, from a shtetl in White Russia, right before World War I, he attended a lecture by Sholem Aleichem in Copenhagen. He was at the tender age of 13 when he went to that lecture. It was in 1914. The next wave of Yiddish speakers arrived in Sweden on the white buses in April 1945 as refugees from the concentration camps. And approximately 3,000 of them decided to stay in Sweden. And I just want to, here is a summary of this, what I just told you. I should also mention that the last group of Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, they came from Poland, arrived in Sweden and in Denmark in the late 60s after being forced to leave Poland during the so-called anti-Zionist campaign. So these are the white buses. It's an incredible story. These were sent out by Denmark and Sweden, And you can see it has the Red Cross insignia and the Swedish flag. And these buses drove from Sweden and Denmark to concentration camps and collected people, survivors, both Jewish and non-Jewish, and brought them to Denmark and Sweden. And this was particularly, the Danish story is that the Danish Jews were in Theresienstadt, a concentration camp outside Prague, and most of them were actually saved, which is a separate story that I'm not going to go into. And they were brought back from Theresienstadt in these white buses. Let's go on here. This is to follow up on the story that I started to tell you about the recognition of Yiddish. In this particular case, there were some really important people with a lot. I would call them verbrennte Yiddishisten, passionate Yiddishists. And in order for us to understand where these people got their brenn from, their passion from, we have to understand where they came from. And I will tell you a story about one of them who was very instrumental in persuading the authorities to turn Yiddish into a national minority language. Her name is Susanne Schneiderman-Rötz, and she grew up in a tightly knit Jewish community of survivors in the 50s and 60s, for whom Yiddish was the daily language of family and friends. Her parents, both survivors of the Lodz ghetto and Auschwitz, settled in the small town of Borås, which is located between Stockholm, the capital, and the second largest city, Göteborg. And the city's textile industry provided work for the Jews, many of whom were skilled tailors who had been forced to contribute to Nazi Germany's textile industry in the Lodz ghetto. In Borås, the survivors created a unique Yiddish-speaking community, a kind of Swedish shtetl where they continued their cultural and political activities from before and during the war. As a result of Schneiderman-Rötz's documentation of the continuous use in Sweden for more than 200 years of Yiddish, supported by my late uncle, David Schwarz, who was a Jewish survivor from the city of Pietrków-Trybunalski in Poland, 50 kilometers from Lodz. The governmental committee decided to make Yiddish one of the 5 languages. But it was not an easy thing because in the beginning, there was a lot of resistance for a lot of different reasons. And what happened was that Susanne Schneiderman-Rötz actually turned to the Swedish Prime Minister. His name at that time was Göran Persson. And he, at that time, was involved in creating some kind of memorial for the Holocaust in Sweden, and particularly to try to address Sweden's role during World War II, their collaboration with the Nazi Germany. And in the middle of the war, they turned around and they started to go the other way and supported the Allied forces. And so he convened, this prime minister convened a major Holocaust conference. It's the first of its kind in Sweden in 1999. And this was at the same time that Schneiderman-Rötz corresponded directly with Persson. And she actually gave me a copy of one of the letters that she sent to him. And I think as a historical document, it's very interesting. And I'm going to read it to you now. Yes, here it's here. Do not complete the work of the Nazis. Do not let the Minority Commission's exclusion of Yiddish give legitimacy to those who deny us our heritage and our culture. By denying the Yiddish speakers in Sweden our linguistic heritage and status, Sweden will be involved in history's greatest crimes against humanity 50 years after the Holocaust. Do not let this happen. So you can see it's very strong. She's really playing on the emotional. She's playing on the Swedish guilt from collaborating with the Germans, and it worked. I mean, basically what happened was that Göran Persson, the prime minister, decided simply to make that decision himself and made Yiddish a national minority language. I think I will go on here. Yes. So this is an example of what Yiddish culture is like today in Sweden. Last November, my wife and I, we went to Stockholm to see a performance of Samuel Beckett's Vatten af Godot in Yiddish translation. And this is a group from New York that was invited to perform this play at the national stage of Sweden. It's called Dramaten. And there were 3 performances, and a total of 800 people showed up for this. And I will just tell you, it was incredible. I mean, it was like this play that I've seen, of course, in several times, really came to its right, and especially its humor was so you know, wonderfully expressive and delightful in Yiddish, and it opened up for some other dimensions of the text that was really incredible, and to gather an audience of 800 people is also tells you something about that there is really a critical mass in particularly in Stockholm for Yiddish culture in Yiddish. And this was a total Yiddish performance. There were, of course, subtitles it was actually in English. It was not in Swedish. So, and I have a YouTube here. If you want to see, you can go, and I'm not going to do that now. So this is very interesting. So we have, again, because of the status of the language. Oh yeah, I should also mention this one here. This is a translation of a classic play by the Swedish playwright August Strindberg. Some of you might know him, and it was translated into Yiddish. And now next week it will be performed at the theater in Stockholm. There will be 5 performances, and this is an amateur group that actually every year put on a new play in Yiddish, and typically they travel all over Sweden. I've seen them several times in Malmö, and they come and perform, and there's always a real hundreds of people showing up for these performances. Let me, I just want to show you this because this is very interesting also. It's television, it's called the Educational Television in Sweden. And they have a lot of Yiddish programs. And I am going to go out so you can see it again. Wait a minute. Here you can see it. Now you can see it, right? Yeah. And I want to play at all these programs, and many of them are for children. They are all in Yiddish, original television in Yiddish for children. And you can see it's quite a bit. But I want to show you one that has become very popular all over the world. And it's almost kind of iconic. It's called Alte Karton in Swedish, old, I don't know, old boxes or something like that. And you can see what it is now. I'll show you. Are you still with me? You can see it?
Yes.
Es regnet schon nicht. Ich stoll kein Wasser in Ergetz. Plan? Bravo, Reutiger. Weißt du den Weg? Ah. Oh nein, da ist euch nicht doch kein Wasser. Weißt von einem anderen? So, lass mir gehen dahin. Schon gehen wir. Der Bassin ist ledig. Wo ist hingekommen das ganze Wasser? Ja, gerecht. Wasser kommt von den Wolken. Die Blumen haben eine Regenwolken. Wie soll? Haben wir Wolken? Das ist unmöglich. Wolken befinden sich im Himmel.
Stell dir vor, wir sollten
Okay.
wegblasen die Wolken.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll just tell you, I've heard from several of my colleagues, and I mean, this has been very popular, particularly among Yiddishists in the United States, because it's original and it's different. And this is just an example of the creativity that goes into renewing Yiddish in Sweden. I am going to go back to my my presentation. So we are here, and this is the play I showed you. So now we are going to my neck of the woods, the university where I teach, and you just give you a little kind of a summary of what kind of program we have. What's very exciting now is that this program has been going on for over 10 years. And now the university, because of funding from the Swedish government, has expanded the number of faculty members from 1, myself, to 3. So they're actually advertising 3 positions now, full-time positions in Yiddish at Lund University. Remarkable. And I will tell you about a similar development in another area in Stockholm, but this is beautiful Lund University in the springtime. It's called the White House in Lund. That's the administration building. That's how it looks in the springtime. And then I want to show you this. This is another success story. And this is a former student of mine, Niklas Oliansky, who has started his own publishing firm in Lund. And the purpose of, oh no, this is not what I want to show you. That's not what I want to show you. This is what I want to show you. Yeah. Let's see if I can. Yeah. So this publishing firm is he publishes a children's book in Yiddish, original literature. This is you probably can't see it. I'll share my screen. You can see it here. Here you have it. These are all Yiddish books, and he publishes quite a number of them every year. One of the most popular one is Harry Potter und der philosophische Stein. It's a translation of Harry Potter into Yiddish. And then you have Herd am Meise Anthologie, which is a great anthology of contemporary Yiddish writers. That is people born after the war, working and writing in Yiddish. And then you have a number of children's books, original children books in Yiddish. Die Fruchten, a Yiddish Bichel, Fatisami Jingste, the Fruits, a little Yiddish book for the very young ones. And you have Schleume Bäumel, mit dem Masseldicken Dreidel, also a children's book, and all kinds of children's book. And so this is a very active publishing house. And I think probably, if I'm not mistaken, the only one of its kind in definitely Northern Europe, for sure. That is totally devoted only to Yiddish literature for children and for adults. And I can tell you that in June, there will be a publication of Isaac Bashevis Singer's Enemy is a Love Story in the original Yiddish that has been compiled from the Yiddish newspaper and now being published in book form. So this is an ongoing, very productive publishing house in Yiddish in Lund, right outside Lund. Yeah, I am gonna go back to my presentation. Yes, I think you can follow it. Yeah, okay, good. Now we're getting to a very exciting thing, and that is the Yiddish-language Center in Stockholm. This has been in the works for quite a while, and now it's happening. They have it's an institution in Stockholm called the Institute for Language and Folklore. They have, after getting green light from the government, have taken initiative to create language centers for the 5 minority languages in Sweden. And the goal is renewal. The goal is revitalization of these languages. They have advertised 3 full-time positions, and we hope that the team will be in place very soon. So what we're going to have now, which is incredible, and I never thought that would happen, is that we'll have an active language center with three people in Stockholm and a very active academic center for the study of Yiddish in Lund with 3 people, full-time people. So you can see there is a real potential for development of Yiddish as a major, Sweden as a major center of Yiddish studies and revitalization of Yiddish in Europe. And I want to just say a few final words here, and which has to do with what this term revitalization really is all about. It can be a little bit abstract. So there are, according to the scholarly literature, social linguistics, and other fields, there are 3 ways of passing on languages, particularly minority languages. There is the so-called natural transmission from parents to children in a native speech community. And we see that with Yiddish, obviously, in the Haredi community, and the Haredi community is not really present in Scandinavia except for Chabad, so that we don't have that kind of quote unquote transmission from parents to children in Sweden. Then you have the second one is what is called vernacular and post-vernacular transmission of the minority language inside and outside the native speech community. And the key word here is post-vernacular. And this has become the not only the key word in Sweden, but also in the United States, that Yiddish is not only, we can't just look at Yiddish as a kind of a quote unquote normal language for daily use. It's also has a lot of secondary symbolic meanings. And that is the term post-vernacular. That means that people use phrases, words, references to Yiddish expressions, even to cultural figures, Yiddish cultural figures. That is post-vernacular. But then there's the third one, and that's where I think that really make Sweden unique. And that is the revitalization that comes about as a result of government-sponsored minority language policy. And that we see very clearly in Sweden. And I just want to read the kind of the agenda for this language center as it is laid out by the authorities. It is to enable the Jewish minority's need and right to reclaim Yiddish. The center shall actively support and stimulate the increased use of Yiddish, provide expert knowledge, and develop methods for strengthening the individual speaker's conditions for using and reclaiming the language, as well as spreading knowledge about the language and how it can be revitalized. Children and youth are a particular priority, and the center's work shall be determined by the Jewish minority's needs for the revitalization of Yiddish. And this is, I can tell you that there's been, a board has been constituted with some of the leading Yiddishists in Sweden, and also representative from various Yiddish organizations in Sweden. And at the moment, the center here is there's a process of hiring the people that will work in this center, and we expect this to be finalized sometime in the summer. I just want to say that in final conclusion is that the future of Yiddish in the Swedish corner, Winkel, as we say in Yiddish, looks very promising primarily due to the active support of the Swedish government. And I believe that this will have a lot of impact also more broadly in Europe and maybe all over the world. And I know that a lot of the leading Yiddish scholars and Yiddish artists and activists have very close ties to the Swedish Yiddish world. Many of them have participated in seminars and workshops in Sweden. And there's no doubt that this kind of infusion of resources from the government is also going to have an impact for the renewal of the language outside Sweden. And then I want to just end with this one here, which is a song by Leib Rosenthal from the Vilna Ghetto. This is a performance by one of the leading Yiddish singers in Sweden. And what's important here is that many of the people who are involved in this work on reclaiming Yiddish are not Jewish, but they have thrown themselves into it with heart and soul. And I think that is a very interesting phenomena, and we can discuss that later, what that actually entails. But I want you to, first of all, listen to this performance. Wir leben ewig ohne groschen Geld. We live for eternity without any money. Und auf die Pickenisch, die alle Sonnen, wo willen uns verschwatzen unser Panim. And may all our enemies, Sonim, go to hell, who tries to destroy our, or to, destroy our future. Wir leben ewig in jeder Show. Wir leben ewig, wir seien da. Wir leben ewig, es brennt a Welt, wir willen leben und erleben schlechte Zeiten überleben. So we are here, we will live forever. Although the world is burning, we will live and we will overcome the bad times. Wir leben ewig, wir seien da. We live forever, we are here. Okay, so I'll end with this one here, and then you can enjoy this performance. Oh, wait a minute. I'll try again. Wait a minute. Can you hear this?
Not yet.
No.
Now we can hear it.
Aye. What is this? Okay, I'll try again. Wait a minute.
Wir leben ewig, es brennt a Welt. Wir leben ewig, ohne groschen Geld. Und läuft zerpicken nicht die alle Sonnen, was willen uns verschwarzen, unser Pony. Wir leben ewig, wir seien tot. Wir leben ewig in jeder Show. Wir wählen Leben und erleben schlechte Zeiten. Überleben, wir leben ewig. Wir seien, wir leben ewig. Es brennt a Welt. Wir leben ewig ohne groschen Geld. Und läuft zerpicken nicht die alles von ihm, was willen uns verschwarzen, unser Pony. Wir leben ewig, wir seien tot. Wir leben ewig in jeder Show. Wir wollen leben und erleben schlechte Zeiten. Überleben, wir leben leben ewig, wir seinen so. Wir leben ewig, ist ganz alt. Wir leben ewig, und ein großen Geld. Und ein Zeppelin ist die alles von ihm, das willen uns verschwarzen und verkommen. Wir leben ewig, wir seien so. Wir leben ewig, in jeder Show. Wir wählen Leben und erleben schlechte Zeiten. Überleben, wir leben ewig, wir seien so.
Okay, I should also say that this singer, her name is Louisa Line, and she is the preeminent Yiddish performer in Sweden. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you again. And as you can imagine, you've triggered a lot of different types of questions, and I'll try to gather them. So I'll start off with two basic questions that cover a bit of ground. So the first one has to do with the Jewish people who came to Sweden before World War II. If you could say a little bit more about what their motivation was, what brought them to the country, and what they created in the country. The other one for now has to do with the relationship between Jews and non-Jews in Sweden. It has two dimensions. One is at McGill, for example, where I teach, we also have a Yiddish program, and quite a lot of the students who take the courses in Yiddish are not Jewish. And so there's a question as to whether that is also true in Sweden. And connected to that, is there anti-Semitism in Sweden? You hear about, things happening in Malmo and other places. And how does that relate to this story about the Yiddish resurgence? Is part of it some sort of pushback, against, the higher status that has been given to Yiddish? So those are two questions for now, and I'll come back with some more questions. And those of you in the audience, just please keep on adding the questions, and I'll transmit them to Jan.
Okay, so before World War II, there were the major immigration was, of course, from the Russian Empire from the early 1880s until World War I. And that's most of the Eastern European Jews that came to Scandinavia. They wanted to go to the US, or at least to London, but they didn't make it. So they stayed in Scandinavia. My grandparents belonged to that group, and as I said, my grandfather came from a little shtetl in White Russia, and he came with his older brother in 1913. And like all kinds of immigration, it's always determined by family. So he had cousins and an uncle in Copenhagen. So that's why he came here, and he stayed here. And my grandmother came from Warsaw a little early in 1906, and settled. The family settled in Copenhagen. And there was a very cohesive Yiddish-speaking community in Copenhagen, and also in Malmö and other places in other major cities in Scandinavia in this period, just like at the Lower East Side of New York. I mean, much, much smaller in scale, of course, but it was the same idea. And because Yiddish is a transnational language, these small centers was connected to the network of Yiddish culture all over the world. So
was Yiddish their first language, the ones in Copenhagen, or a second language that they spoke in the home or otherwise? Was Danish the major language of communication?
Well, I mean, for my grandparents, and they were fairly typical, their first language was Yiddish. And you know, they knew some Russian. I mean, my grandfather knew Russian because he was from Russia. My grandmother knew some Polish. She was from Poland. But the primary language and the language that they operated in was Yiddish. And they had Yiddish cultural institution. They were very left-oriented in their politics. Some of them were Bundists, some of them were socialists. My grandfather was a communist. And he was actually interned during World War II as a communist. So they were left politics, very much so, for this generation. And then in terms of I mean, the whole interesting thing is, of course, this, I would call it, what we're seeing now, and this is not a Swedish phenomenon, it's all over the world. There's a great deal of interest in Yiddish and Yiddish culture, and not necessarily only among Jews, also among Jews, but also among non-Jews. It's because, I mean, we live in an open world. We live in a world of a lot of, movement and easy communication, and Yiddish is accessible and it's available. You can study it everywhere. You can study it online. And I will be honest to you, I've had some fabulous students that have no Jewish connection whatsoever, that have learned the language, they speak it fluently, they write in the language. Some of them have even published poetry in Yiddish in journals. So this goes to show that you don't need to, it's not a Jewish thing. It's just like any other language, right? And it used to be a Jewish thing, but it's not that anymore necessarily. It's also a Jewish thing, of course. It will always be a Jewish thing, and it will always be very deeply rooted in the Jewish tradition and Judaism and history and so on. But it is also a language like any other language that you can learn and acquire. And I don't think it's that much different from Hebrew for that matter in that regard. In terms of anti-Semitism, I'm really, thank you for asking that question, because I realized that was part of my presentation. I think I just skipped over it because it's not so pleasant. So, but of course there is the thing about anti-Semitism in here is that it's very much on very right-wing, white supremacist groups. That's one origin of anti-Semitism. And the other one is, of course, the people with origins in the Middle East, and they have a hard time distinguishing between Israelis and Jews. So they turn a lot of their anger towards Israel, towards Jews in Sweden. So there's that kind of anti-Semitism. And like anywhere else in Europe, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that phenomenon, is that you can't go to synagogue without going through a row of people, police officers with guns and even machine guns. I mean, that's the standard here. And it's very unfortunate and it's sad, but that's how it is. And I think in terms of Yiddish, it has a double impact. On one hand, it makes people afraid of being Jewish in a public space. I mean, wearing a Magen David or speaking Jewish languages in public. At the same time, it also stimulate the internal use and identification with Jewish languages and Jewish history and Jewish Jewishness. So you have this double. I mean, that Jews are maybe a little bit more careful about how they present themselves in the public space, but what they do in private and inside the Jewish community is in a different, and that's where you see that incredible vitality right now, right? in terms of renewal of Jewish life. And this is not only Yiddish. I want to emphasize that this phenomena, I mean, we're talking about Yiddish because that's what I was asked to talk about, but you have the same kind of renewal and flourishing of Jewish culture in general in Sweden, particularly in Sweden. Not so much, unfortunately, in Denmark and Norway, but very much so in Sweden. There are a lot of festivals and seminars and all kinds of things. Sweden is a very vibrant Jewish community. They think it's between 20 and 25,000 Jews today, but it's very hard to get precise numbers.
Thanks, Yigad. I'll go back to the questions here. To me, it's just, if I interject a little bracketed comment, to me, it's fascinating, and in a situation where people are nervous in some way about outward Jewish expressions, they're not nervous about having the Swedish police site available in Yiddish. They're not afraid that that's going to create some sort of backlash. So it's a fascinating dynamic that you're sharing with us. So here's a couple of other questions from the chat. So one has to do with, there was a time that, there was the people who were interested in Yiddish and Yiddish culture, were often people who are not religious. What is the dynamic in Sweden? Are the same Jewish people who are working towards the revitalization of Sweden also active in denominations, Jewish religious denominations, or in Sweden, or does it tend to be a separate type of Jewish identification? And if they are interested and involved in denominations, what denominations are they involved in? There's also a question here about how much of the transmission in Sweden of Yiddish is taking place between grandparents and grandchildren, or is that only more of a Hasidic phenomenon? And then there's a question which I'm going to read here because it'll be hard for me to paraphrase without destroying something here. But Razel asks, I was interested to read recently about the opening of a dedicated Romani library in Malmo, slated for later this year. Are there plans for something similar for Yiddish, either as part of the language center or distinct from it? And could you speak more broadly to the role of libraries here in Sweden's minority language policy? So I'll retreat for a second because I've given you a lot to respond to.
Yeah, so I'll start with the last question, because that is, I can answer that very concretely. There is a search for a person to run the Jewish resource library in Stockholm. They're looking for a librarian who can do that, and that it's a very fine collection with a lot of Hebrew and Yiddish books. So and it's an important part of the work that is being done right now with Yiddish in Sweden, this resource library. So that's a concrete thing. And the grandparents, and this is very interesting because I didn't mention that another important thing is the creation of a teacher education program at my university for Yiddish teachers. And I believe that this will be a accredited program if you have completed the courses, you'll be able to go out in the Swedish schools and teach Yiddish. There is a law in Sweden that you can require for your children to have a teacher in the minority language at your school. And it's not required that this is a language that is spoken at home. it is enough for the language to be what they call a heritage language. So if somebody has that kind of heritage from Eastern European Jewish ancestry, or have some kind of Yiddish speaking grandparents, that would qualify for a Yiddish teacher. And the program is designed especially, particularly, I think, not only for, but particularly for grandparents. I think there would be several retirees, Yiddish speaking retirees, that would want to take that program, complete that program, so they can go out and teach, be accredited teachers, Yiddish teachers in the schools. And we already see that many from that generation, they are very actively involved in passing on Yiddish to their grandchildren's generation, basically. So this is a very important group, and we are very aware of that in the work of revitalization in Sweden. And then you had another question that I forgot, the main question. What was that?
It was about the connection between the religious denominations and the resurgence of Yiddish. Are they two separate phenomena, or the same people who are leading one are also involved in synagogue life?
So what has happened here is very interesting. And I just want to tell you, I mean, this is an evolving situation, and it's evolving very quickly. Just an anecdote, when I went to school in Copenhagen, I went to a Jewish day school, modern Orthodox. We're way back in the 60s now. And I didn't learn anything about Yiddish or Eastern European Jewish culture. It was all Hebrew, it was all Israel, and that was how it was at the time. And that pattern kind of was maintained until I would say, until the early 21st century. And now we have seen a very marked shift there. And the shift is interesting because it used to be that a good number of people in the Jewish community in Sweden didn't really have any kind of relationship to Yiddish. And some of them were actually against that Yiddish should be kind of proclaimed a national minority, because they didn't have any kind of connection. It was not important to them. I mean, they were Swedish 2 or 3 generations, or they were very connected to Israel and Hebrew, and Yiddish didn't play any role for them. But what has happened in the last 10 years, I would say, is that there's been a shift. So now even the established Jewish community has embraced Yiddish. It has become mainstream in Sweden. And so you see that you see that also in the various denominations. There are all the, conservative or reform, and they all embrace Yiddish. And Yiddish is a cool thing, a positive thing, a way of building Jewish continuity and identity in Sweden. So this has really changed very much so in the last, as I said, 10 years, 10, 15 years.
Thank you. So just a couple of quick questions, additional ones. One is, are there plans now that, the teaching of Yiddish is expanding so much at the university level? Is there plans to open up kind of a summer program of the type that exists at Oxford and at NYU and other places? We want to give you more work to do. And secondly, if you could say a little bit about the general linguistic environment of Sweden. Is it, a country where there's a lot of very different languages spoken, and there's a general interest in languages, including not the minority languages that are listed in the bill? Is there a lot of bilingualism and trilingualism in the country? And finally, again, this is a question for me, I guess. I'm curious into the children's programming that you showed an example of. To what extent does the children's program in Yiddish represent the realities of life in Sweden? Is it, is it playing, like, how is it different, let's say, than, similar children's programming that is being created in Swedish, in terms of the themes that are dealt with,
Yeah, okay, great questions, excellent questions. So the summer program, if I was gonna predict, I would say it's definitely likely that there will be a summer program in Lund in the next 3 to 5 years, because we have we have people, and summer programs are very popular, and I think it's very likely actually that it will happen. So in terms of bilingualism, Sweden is what sets Sweden apart from the other Scandinavian countries is that it's a multicultural model. And there's a historical explanation for that, and it has to do with especially with Olof Palme. Some of you might know him. He was the prime minister. Tragically, he was killed. He was assassinated, basically. But he was very instrumental in shaping Sweden as a multicultural society, and kind of breaking away from the homogeneous national model that is so characteristic of Northern and Western European countries. And to a certain extent, he succeeded. Sweden has been one of the most generous societies, I would say, in Europe, not only in Scandinavian, in taking in refugees, and very kind of an open door policy until the refugee crisis in 2015, when Sweden finally started to close. But until then, they took in a lot. And it's a very diverse society, actually, surprisingly so. I mean, I lived in Malmö for over 10 years, and I was surprised how diverse Malmö is. I mean, you have people from all over the world, and some neighborhoods are, and you hear languages from all over the world. So it's definitely, at least in Malmö and in places, in the major cities, you have that multiculturalism. It is not unproblematic. There are a lot of problems with it. And at the moment, there's a terrible riots in Malmö, actually, as we speak, and has to do with the criminal gangs, and some of them also related to the immigrant communities. It's not an unproblematic thing, but I'm just saying that is the model in Sweden, and it is very much established, the multicultural model, and there's a consensus that is the model. Some of the far right political parties have tried to kind of turn the clock back, but they haven't succeeded.
Yeah, and I have please finish.
No, I mean, I just want to, the children's program that I showed, I mean, what is so interesting about them, and I have not really, I haven't really analyzed it, but they are very Swedish. The sensibility of these Yiddish programs are very Swedish. And also, there's very little kind of overt Jewish religious content in them. There's cultural content, but very little overt religious content. And it's some of these programs are being modeled on Swedish children's programs, actually. So that's
so interesting. Yeah, and thank you for that, for everything. I have a final question for you, but don't run away, because after that, I'm going to do a short presentation about upcoming programs, and then we're just sticking around for further questions. And at that point, people can unmute and we can be more informal. But my final question for you, Jan, is there you are in Denmark. Here we are, Sofa Ma'arav, near the edge of the West, 7,000 miles away, and surrounding us is a whole world Jewish civilization. And it's been fascinating to turn our attention to this not forgotten, but under experienced segment of world Jewry. But I wonder if you have some thoughts about what the message is for world Jewry as a whole of the Swedish Yiddish experience. What can you abstract from it and share with us?
I apologize if I'm a little too over the top now, but I do want to say one thing. I think what Jewish history tells us, and especially with revivalist movements like Hasidism in Eastern Europe, they started as very small local groups of people. I mean, Baal Shem Tov, that is now considered the founder of Hasidism, it was a very small cadre of people that actually surrounded him in Western Ukraine, right? And it took several generations for that to build. And I think what I think the Swedish story has to offer world Jewry is that transformation and change always starts on the local level. You have to start on the local level and work there. I mean, and that's the only way you can, and it's incremental. Those kind of changes are incremental. It's not going to happen overnight, right? But I believe in the local level teaching, educating, and programs and building communities and so on and so forth on the local level. And then it will branch out. And we already see, I mean, because of the internet, you have all these connections. You can do like this webinar. We can also do that. The Swedish, there's a program in Sweden now. They have 6 interviews every year with a Yiddish scholar or Yiddish activist in Yiddish. And this is broadcast via the internet in the form of webinars. And it's for the whole world, of course, right? So you have that kind of impact. But I think it starts on the local level. That's where it starts.
Thank you so much for that, Jan, and we're going to return to it. I'm sure there'll be some comments. I want to take a few minutes now and share how some of these issues reverberate through a project of the Mordecai M. Kaplan Center for Jewish Peoplehood, a 21st century vision of Jewish education, a Kaplanian vision, and also mention a couple upcoming events. But this has been very much stuck in my head as I project next year a project for the center that I hope all of you will be part of, that I call the Kaplanian Report Card, which is looking at the rubrics that Kaplan gave us in 1934 and seeing how far have we gone towards realizing the inspiration of those projects. And a very key one is language and the role of language. So what I find so extraordinarily interesting and challenging in terms of a radical challenge and a question, about a year ago, I asked some leading Reconstructionist rabbis to formulate their own picture of the 5 goals of Jewish education, building off of, but also critiquing and departing from Kaplan's 5 goals in 1934 in Judaism as a Civilization. So I just want you to, I think it's rather breathtaking. On the one hand, here is Kaplan. One of the primary goals is to understand and appreciate Hebrew language and literature. Okay, so that clearly challenges us to be bilingual here in North America, or trilingual to my French-speaking Canadian friends, where our native language and the Hebrew language are both honored, studied, and appreciated. Over on the right, there is a formulation from, again, a very thoughtful leader of Jewish life where there's not a hint of Hebrew. In the place of where Hebrew would fit into the taxonomy of goals, we have concrete and creative approaches for living a meaningful Jewish life when families are being pulled in so many directions by extracurricular activities and other priorities. Translation, Judaism not only can, but needs to be lived in translation with English being the primary language, because that's all we're going to be able to pull off. And then a third formulation by a different rabbi, I'm going to read this: have an awareness of the great diversity and richness of Jewish cultures, including languages, cuisines, religious traditions, historical experiences, and more. Here's the key, the ikar. This would include not privileging Hebrew as the Jewish language. See later in my statement that it is important, but familiarizing our people with the many expressions of Jewish culture in Yiddish, Ladino, English, etc. So here you are, folks: bilingualism, monolingualism, and multilingualism. There's so much to think about in this regard, and I'm grateful that Ian has raised it from a different perspective. We will be returning to this because Hebrew will be one of the topics we're looking at in some great depth next year. And finally, before we return to Yen and any final set of questions you might have, I want to point out the future webinars coming up this year. This was our 6th. We have 2 more. One is next week, a co-sponsored webinar with the Society for Advancement of Judaism, 40 years of Kaplanian Jewish learning. That has 6 different education directors interacting with myself and Rabbi Lauren Grabel, the rabbi at SAJ, and think that will be of interest. And I know and hope that you will join us. The last seminar of the year, webinar of the year, is June 26th. It focuses on Jewish leadership. It's a webinar in memory of Dan Cederbaum as we complete his first year, complete the Yahrzeit year. July 2nd is his Yahrzeit. And also at this webinar, you will meet of the 39 applicants for the Dan Cederbaum Prize, many of whom have this remarkable world Jewish civilization frame. We will see which 2 of them are the ultimate recipients of the prize, and you will hear a little bit about that. I'm going to move on because next year will be upon us soon enough. So we have an extension of this year's dialogue, 2 Elul webinars. One Wednesday, August 31st, an afternoon book club. The folks who got so much out of Small Creatures Such as We, Sasha Sagan's webinar and an explanation of the book, read that book again, had a book club, and they're interested to move on to Rabbi Toba Spitzer's very important new book, God is Here, The Role of Metaphor in Our Theological Formation. And on Tuesday evening, September 13th, Jane Susswine, we're experimenting with a different time. You're sympathetic to that. From 7:30 to 9, Rabbi Spitzer will be with us. So that's all happening. And you should be receiving, I believe within the next week or 2, if not a little later, an invitation from Jane Susswine, our board member, asking for feedback about this year's webinars, and also what webinars might you be interested in as we begin the planning process for next year. So I'm going to stop my screen share now, invite you to be part of all these developments and dialogues, and see if anyone would like to unmute and talk directly to Jan at this point with a comment, your own thinking, or a question. So just unmute and remind us who you are and your comment.
Yeah, and this is Jane Susswine. This was wonderful and enlightening, very, all new. I'm wondering, many of the Yiddish speakers here in this country are Chabad or Orthodox, not all, but how is that reflect? What is the denominational picture in Sweden of the Yiddish speakers?
Well, as I said, I mean, there are no significant Haredi presence in Sweden or in Scandinavia for that matter. There are some few Chabad families, and they speak, of course, they speak Yiddish. But I mean, where you have Yiddish is in groups, in cultural settings, in language groups, in reading groups. When you go to, I mean, if there's a Yiddish play, you'll meet people there and you'll speak Yiddish to them. And then, of course, also in certain families, there is a use of Yiddish, but probably very limited, I would say. So it's the way it's, I mean, it is post-vernacular primarily, I would say. But I mean, there's an annual seminar in Stockholm, which is wonderful. You have 100 people gathering and you have workshops in Yiddish about Yiddish culture, and often with some great people from abroad. And it's a very intensive weekend program taking place in Yiddish. And that is kind of like a submersion in Yiddish, and it happens once a year. But I can't see why it couldn't be expanded so it happens more than once a year. And I know that in Stockholm, I don't live in Stockholm, I live in Copenhagen. And unfortunately in Copenhagen, there's almost nothing going on in Yiddish. So, but in Stockholm, it's a whole different story, and it's pretty vibrant actually. A lot of activities there.
Someone else?
Hi, it's Rabbi Marna Sapsowitz in Olympia, Washington. I'm intrigued by what you said about Yiddish being attractive to non-Jews as just another language, and I'd love to see some attention to, for some reason Yiddish has become sexy in some of the same ways that Kabbalah has become sexy, and like people are attracted to this one piece of Jewish culture, Jewish history, Jewish civilization, without being grounded in everything else. I share what I think is a relevant anecdote about a fellow Yiddish student whom I met when I was doing the Vilnius summer program, Oliver Shalom. She was a languages major. She told me she collected languages like others collected postage stamps. And Yiddish was cool. It had a neat new alphabet, an alphabet that was new to her. She was not Jewish. And as she got deeper into her Yiddish studies, she, particularly reading some of the classic Yiddish writers, she missed all the cultural references, and she called up her Jewish friends and said, what's an esrog? What's Shmini Atzeres? And eventually he got tired and said, honey, you need to take an Intro to Judaism class. And she said, nah, that's for people who want to convert. But, eventually she did. And the end of the story is that she's now Jewish, but that's but the great Yiddish writers were so grounded in Yiddishkeit, both meanings of the word, not only in the language, but in Jewishness, and all their references and all their allusions and all their milieu. And I think has to be a real challenge for someone who just says, oh, this is a cool language, I'll learn it.
But it's not only a challenge for people non-Jews, it's also a challenge for Jews. Yeah. I mean, many Jews, they don't have those kind of references. They don't, I mean, we are much more illiterate in terms of Jewish, basic Jewish knowledge than the generation, that read these classical Yiddish and Hebrew writers 100 years ago, right? And because they went through the cheder, they went through some of them through the yeshiva, they have the background. And so I don't think it's a question of Jews and non-Jews. I think in general, there's a decline of literacy in Judaism. Mm-hmm. I think your story is wonderful because I've had that experience with several of my students. I mean, they start, and there's another thing that is perhaps different, actually significantly different from the United States. And that is, United States is a religious country. Religion matters, right? Christianity and Judaism and Islam, it matters. It's people take religion seriously in the United States. They don't do that in Scandinavia. It's a highly secularized society. And Yiddish is a very kind of safe way to get in. If you're not interested in religion and don't have any religious bone in your body, that's a very safe way and fascinating way into the Jewish world, because it's a full Jewish world. It's not only about religion and religious laws and customs and all that stuff. It's about a full Jewish world when you read Shalom Aleichem, Isaac Bashevis Singer, and that is something that speaks to people. And here, I think. And that's why you see a lot of these works are now being translated into Swedish. I mean, the Isaac Bashevis Singer's sister, Esther Keitman's, one of her novels has just been released in Swedish. And there's a market for that here. People are interested in it. And so I think, I think you are absolutely right. This is often the first step into the Jewish world for some people. And some people, they take the next step, but some people stop. They only quote unquote, learn the basic of the language and that's it. But some people actually move on. And that's really interesting.
Thanks.
You know, it's also reminiscent to me of discussions, I think, of one at our synagogue this Shabbat about, were we going to sing Go Down Moses as part of our Pesach 8th day celebration? Well, we used to do that very wholeheartedly, but now there's a kind of trope of, is that cultural appropriation? Is that taking from the Black African-American experience? Well, it clearly is. But they aren't free yet. So how do we do that? And Eric will know the name of a mutual teacher of ours, Michael Rosenak. And from Israel, I have a very vivid memory in 1969 taking a class with him. And he was, how universal can you be? And he was very attuned to, he had spent time in America, and he remembered the commercial about, you don't have to be Jewish to eat Levi's, you know what I mean, rye bread. Anyone can eat it. And he was bothered by that phenomena, because if your culture was so universal and so accessible to everyone, then what's left of it in particular for you? Now that seems very unattuned to the multicultural tropes that are so frequent these days. But the issue, I think, is there that people cut into this renaissance of Yiddish in different ways, and in a healthy pluralistic society, all those paths are allowed. But there is here, anyway, I can speak, some emerging sensitivity to, you can't share the cultures infinitely without being aware of crossing some boundaries. Any other questions or comments before we thank Jan for a really wonderful afternoon and end our time together?
If I could, I'd like to put something in an experience that I had of growing up with Yiddish. My parents spoke it at home, but not to us. They used it as their like secret code. They spoke it when they didn't want us to understand, which worked until I got to 8th grade and started taking German at school, and I could make out enough of it to break the code. But now as an adult, I regret that they didn't, speak it to us so that I would have grown up with it and just know it. I like what I know of it, but it's just, songs and some expressions and, but it's not, I'm not literate in it. So, and I understand that was true for a number of, a lot of other people as well.
Ellen Greenberg keeps raising her hand.
Thank you, Kevin, for monitoring that better than Eric or I. Who's raising their hand?
Ellen Greenberg needs to unmute first, though.
That's my cousin. Thank you.
Jeffrey's my cousin. Thank you for recognizing that. Just last week, actually, I received I've sent indications of this Zoom meeting to many people. I'm hoping that it will be recorded and I can send it to those who couldn't make it. Yeah. Also, just last week, I received a message from a friend of mine in Israel who was working on a book about portraits of 19th century Jews in Scandinavia. And she mentioned a bunch of family names, Josephson, Davidson, all kinds of family names of, particularly in Sweden. And she's going to be in Copenhagen next month researching, as she says, the Royal Library, the Royal Library, and also the Jewish Museum. So there must be archives of these things all around Copenhagen.
Absolutely, there is. And yes, there's a very, absolutely. The Royal Library has a fantastic Judaica collection, one of the best in Europe. Very, very impressive collection of all kinds of material. So yeah, so she will be in the right place for research. Yeah.
Thank you, Ellen. Anyone else as we move to a close?
I'm just wondering how you get a link to the recording of this program, because I would like to send it to the people in my adult Yiddish group that is kind of on hiatus right now.
Hi, Sue and Mike. This is Jeffrey from Bethel. We recognize each other. I will get, well, first of all, whether you want to or not, you'll be imported into our Mordecai M. Kaplan Center contacts because you participated, which means that you will get the recording. But if somehow it doesn't come to you, you have my email, you can send a note to me and I'll get it back to you. But now that you're part of the contacts, you should get the recording as we advertise another webinar coming up. We almost always give the recording from the last one. So yes, I appreciate people passing these on.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. All right. I'm going to, on behalf of all of us, do one of these. We can use any language you choose. Someone should say it in Yiddish. How do we say in Yiddish? Thank you so much for a wonderful time together. Could someone do that?
Großen Dank.
Okay, a großen Dank. Jan, it was wonderful. I'm going to just ask Eric and Jane if they could stay on for 1 minute about some quick Kaplan Center business, and thank everyone for being with us. It was a very wonderful session, I thought.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thank you. Großen Dank.
Vielen Dank, Ellen.
Bye-bye. Bye.